Here's where it all starts. The foundation of our production, the soil. We can't begin to plant our crop without preparing our fields for the year. So our first step in all of this is nitrogen application. This is vital to production, and in broad terms, it sets the foundation to bring our corn crops to their highest yield potential. Nitrogen is a key element in the growth of our corn, or any plant for that matter. The presence of nitrogen in soil, and in turn our corn plants, makes it possible for our corn to better produce chlorophyll. Now, chlorophyll is the chemical that gives plants their green color and allows them to absorb energy from sunlight. The chlorophyll traps energy from the light, then uses that energy to form a chemical reaction that converts carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and glucose, which is a form of sugar. This process is known as photosynthesis, which translates as to make with light. So, to incorporate nitrogen into our fields, we utilize two methods. The first method is pre-plant spraying. This is a straightforward method that involves the utilization of a sprayer to coat our fields in a 28% liquid nitrogen solution. It works on the simple scientific principle of natural absorption into the soil. We spray our acres with the 28% nitrogen and allow it to saturate our fields. Ideally, we would like a light rain soon after to help the soil more fully absorb the nitrogen before cultivating. Now, as we mentioned before, we utilize two methods for applying nitrogen to our fields. And as we introduced it, the pre-plant spray on nitrogen is considered our first pass of the season. But we can also utilize a post-plant method of nitrogen application. After a field has been planted but not yet had nitrogen applied to it, we will apply it using a piece of equipment that we call a 28 bar. This represents the 28% nitrogen saturation in the application, and this method is called side dressing. Side dressing is the practice of applying nitrogen between rows of corn at a certain level of maturity directly into the soil. This allows our corn to absorb the nitrogen at the most optimal time in the most optimal way, directly through the root stem. This method of nitrogen application is common practice for many farmers, and the reasons for doing so may vary. But for us, it comes down to a few factors such as field conditions, weather patterns, and in some cases, workload distribution. And while it is not classified as one of our official 14 passes, it is still a vital step that we may have to take to produce high quality seed corn. From here, we move into our second pass, cultivation. Where nitrogen application is a pass meant for the nourishment of our crop, cultivation is utilized to prepare our fields to accept our seeds. Post-harvest, our soil becomes hard and clotted during the winter months. So in order to prepare fields for the new season, we must make passes to break up the earth and give our planters a fresh, loose, workable plane to plant our seeds in. In order to do this, we will utilize cultivators and rolling baskets. In a pass, the cultivators, which are composed of large hooked broad blades, will break up the earth into larger, rougher chunks, pulling up soil clots out of the earth. Following directly behind our cultivator is our rolling baskets. These baskets are bladed wheel baskets that roll across the top of the soil and break up our large clots into smaller, finer pieces. This allows us to have the best starting point for our fields coming into the season. This step is crucial as it makes our soil workable and optimal for planting, nourishing, and harvesting our seed corn. Optimal. It's an interesting word that I believe will become a theme as we journey along the path towards understanding the work and precision of the modern farmer. Male and female planting. When we talk about how we plant our cornfields, it all comes down to genetics. But it starts with the numbers. We plant our fields in a 4-1 pattern. This means that we plant 1 row of male corn for every 4 rows of female corn. This ratio allows us to get the greatest yield from our fields while also ensuring a healthy quantity of pollen. Which leads us to the genetics. We start with 2 parent seed types. These are referred to as inbreds. These seeds are selected for specific genetic characteristics that we need to combine into a new generation of seed corn that will eventually become commercial corn. With these two parent seed types, we must look at their rate of maturing to determine how we must plant them. For the male plant, we must look at the point that their stalks will grow tassels and release pollen. For females, we look at the point where their silks are out and able to catch and accept pollen. This is where we get our 3 planting styles: male ahead, male delayed, and straight away. Before we dive into these methods, to help you better understand the need for them, please picture with me a pulse line. This pulse is the life of a corn plant, and this large blip is the point where our corn experiences its pollination. But this blip does not happen at the same time across all of our parent seeds. So when we are working with 2 different inbreds, we have to make sure that the moment of maturity is synchronized with one another. If our timing is off with that point, the rhythm of our crop is not there. But with our research and planting methods, we can bring these 2 in sync. In that window where the 2 sync up, it's called the nick. So now we look at the different methods we utilize to make sure that this blip is synced up in our parent seeds. The first is male ahead. If our male takes a longer time to mature to the point of pollination than our female, we will plant the male, then come back after a determined amount of time and plant the female rows. Male delayed is just the opposite. This is for male plants that have a short maturing timeline compared to their female counterpart. So we'll plant the female rows and come back after that determined amount of time to plant the male rows. And then straight away is for the instance when the 2 parent seeds have a very close timeline of maturing to the point of pollination. We simply plant the male and female seeds at the same time. But we also have a method of intervention that allows us to extend this window of pollination for our fields. This is flaming. Flaming is a secondary method that we can turn to further expand our pollination period for our male plants. We do this by utilizing a piece of equipment that fires a pulsing flame over the tops of our young male rows. This does not terminate these plants. What it does is pause the growth of roughly half of the male plants in our field by just a few days. This means that when our cornfields start to come into their pollination season, the male plants will have a time window that is roughly twice as wide to pollinate our female rows. Whether or not this is necessary is one of the many calculations we have to do when we are making our plans for the year. And as you can see, there are a great number of factors that go into how we plant our corn crop. And it takes a great deal of knowledge, research, and preparation to be in sync with the plants out in our fields. But it all comes down to doing every step with great precision to optimize our work and achieving the goal of yielding the best seeds in the world. There it is again. Optimize. It seems to be just as much a part of the process as any factor we face. And I'm sure we'll find this to be especially true in the next phase of our journey as we look beyond planting and into the pollination season. Pollination control. The heart of what we do in regards to our corn plants is rooted in pollination. It's why we utilize a 4-to-1 planting style and why we care about the nick. The nick is the window of pollination for our corn plants. We have to make sure our male and female plants hit the nick at the same time. This is why we have different timing in our planting and why we may flame male rows. We want to ensure successful pollination. This means that we have to take great control over the pollination process with good preparation and 3 important passes. But before we begin with machine passes to control our pollination, we have to make sure both our male and female rows are just about ready to begin their pollination process. For females, we have to make sure that they are beginning to show their silks and have not yet begun showing their tassels. For male rows, we want to make sure that their tassels are showing but not yet pollinating. We will walk fields at different starting points and take counts on each row to get averages of where our male and female corn plants are in their development to make the decision that it is time to begin our first pass of pollination control. Once it is time, our first pass in this is cutting. This refers to our process of cutting the tops off our female rows using a 12-head mower. This allows our female plants to rapidly sprout their tassel shoots for removal in our next step. Now, you may ask why this is necessary. Well, corn plants are homozygous plants, which means they have both tassels, the male reproductive trait, and silks, the female reproductive trait, and are able to self-pollinate to reproduce. That is what we're working to prevent. So we must take these steps to prevent the self-pollination of our seed corn, the first of which is the cutting pass. Once we've cut our female rows, there is a growth period where we have to allow the tassel shoots to extend before we proceed to remove them with the puller. The pulling pass is one that must be exact and complete. Going back to the science of hybridization, we cannot allow our female rows to maintain any tassels. So, to protect the purity of our hybrids at harvest, we must make sure that this step is completed at 100%. So, we utilize two methods to ensure this. The first is the puller machine pass. Like our cutter, this is a 12-head machine, but in place of mower decks, we have a 4-wheel system. Each head consists of 2 pairs of rubber wheels that rotate opposite each other in order to grab the tassel shoot, pull it off the stalk, and throw it to the side in a fraction of a second. It is a simple system that fills a very important need. This machine can detassel a field very quickly and achieve a high percent of the 100% goal. But we still need to make sure that we see the step through to the end, so we often implement an extra pass of pulling, but this time on foot. To make sure that we don't miss a single female tassel, we have crews start at the edge of our fields and walk the rows to pull any missed tassels. This is a key part of the pulling phase and of the pollination season, again, because we must make sure that this job is 100% complete. But once it is done, we're able to wait for nature to take its course. With our female rows showing silks and our male rows releasing pollen, the hybridization process has begun and we can make preparations for the final pass of pollination control, male destroying. Our last pass of this phase is to destroy our male rows. It is important that we include this step because if it were to be neglected, then the effort of our last 2 passes would be void. We must destroy our male rows because we need to protect the purity of our final crop. Since our male rows are not hybridized, we cannot maintain them through harvest. So we simply come in with a set of bladed metal wheels, then knock them down and chop them into the soil. This terminates the plant and keeps it from producing fully developed ears of seed corn and prevents it from being actualized as part of our harvested crop. And with this, we have now done everything we can to optimize the power of our plants to create a great yield of hybrid seed corn. But before we get there, there are a few pieces of important crop maintenance we must bring forward first. Spraying passes. When we go to great lengths to bring our corn crop to fruition through the process of precision planting, monitored hybridization through a meticulous controlled pollination process, and extreme care in the harvesting phase, it is important to take great care of our fields in the intermediate times between these major passes and phases. In order to take the extra caring steps needed, we have implemented 4 major spraying passes. These 4 passes will apply 3 different types of protectants to our fields and our crop. Our first pass in spraying is our pre-emergent. This pass follows our first planting phase, usually the female planting, and is classified as residual herbicide spray. Now, to break that down, first is the term herbicide. This refers to a chemical that is naturally or synthetically made and is utilized for the purpose of killing other plants. In this case, we utilize herbicides to foster an environment where our corn has little competition for growth space and nutrients. We go to great lengths to optimize our fields for our crops, and utilizing herbicides allows us to further the optimization of their growing space. Now, the second piece of this first spray pass is the term residual. This means that the chemical that is sprayed on our fields is drawn down into the soil through absorption and taken into the unemerged corn plant. This means that the chemical will have a larger window of effectiveness by incorporating the herbicide into the plant. So we utilize the residual herbicide for our first and second spray passes. As mentioned before, the first pass comes after our first phase of planting and is a pre-emergent application, while the second pass follows our second round of planting and is considered a post-emergent spray. Now, these terms, pre and post-emergent, refer to the two sides of a specific milestone in our corn's life. Pre-emergent is the phase of the plant before it has broken through the soil. The other side of this is post-emergent, which refers to the phase of life after the plant has emerged from the soil. From here, we have a period of growth for our corn. This allows our crop to go through its natural maturation and enter its pollination phase. Once our corn reaches the other side of pollination and has begun to develop its kernels, or in our case its seeds, we perform our third and fourth spray passes in a narrow time frame. Our third spray pass is a non-residual insecticide. Now, to break this down, a non-residual spray is one that does not have a long-lasting or residual effect. It is a potent application that has an immediate effect and kills its intended target, and that's it. In this case, it is an insecticide, which specifically targets bugs. Now, when we talk about spraying for insects, we look at specific populations to manage. The main focus in our efforts is the rootworm. This is an insect whose larvae will feed on the roots of our corn plant, and since corn receives its nutrition through its root system, damage to it will cause the plant to die and be fruitless. So, to manage this issue and other insect problems, we utilize insecticides. And lastly, our fourth and final spray pass is a non-residual fungicide. This is a potent spray that attacks fungi. This spray is very important because it offers a number of benefits when it comes to the overall health of our corn. Fungal infections in corn are very serious and can be detrimental to the yield of our fields. So, making sure that our corn crop is protected from fungi is as crucial as each one of these passes. And overall, giving our fields the protectants they need is key to seeing our yield optimized at the end of the season. There it is again, optimal. We've mentioned this term in many of its tenses and synonyms, and it has reached into every area we have discussed so far, and quite frankly to great relevance to the topic. But now, I truly believe that we will see its role come to true fruition in our operations as we reach the end of the crop season and move into our next phase. Harvest. Here we are, the final pass our corn will have in our fields, and it all begins with the equipment. But before we get there, let's review. We begin our year by preparing our fields. We apply nitrogen to enrich our soil, then we cultivate our ground by turning over our soil to create a workable surface. We then turn that renewed surface into a field by planting our female corn. That corn then underwent our first pre-emergent residual herbicide spray. Then we added to our fields by planting our male rows of corn. Then the field receives a post-emergent residual herbicide spray. Then after some time of growth, our female rows are cut in order to begin the pollination control process. Once the females grow their tassels, we then pull them from the females to prevent them from pollinating. Once the males have released their pollen and begin the hybridization process with the female rows, we come through and destroy the males. We then add a protective insecticide to our fields, followed shortly by a fungicide protectant. And now we've curated a full, strong, and fruitful field that is ready for harvest. So, as we mentioned, the harvest season all starts with the equipment, and in our case, the first thing we go to is a moisture tester. When we are making our final decisions on starting harvest, we want to make sure our corn reads at a certain moisture level. To take these readings, we go to each field to take multiple samples of the moisture level to get an average of the entire field. We utilize this average to tell us when we can begin to harvest the corn in the field. Once we begin to see moisture of the field fall below 40%, we'll begin to plan and mobilize our fleet to begin harvesting. Now, the second pieces of equipment that we go to for harvest are our pickers. There are two types of machinery that can be utilized for corn harvesting. The first is a combine, a type of harvester that combines cutting, threshing, and winnowing into one machine. This machine allows you to leave the field with corn that has been fully removed from the cob. The other option is the picker. This machine, typically used for sweet corn, simply removes the ear of corn from the stalk. Where a combine would cut the stalk, remove the stalk and husk, and separate the corn from the cob, the picker leaves a far more intact ear of corn to be processed at a later time. For our system, we utilize the picker. This allows us to be far more in control over the final stages of our seed corn as it makes its way through our processing. So, in order to take our corn from the field to our facility, we mobilize our pickers to begin the harvesting of our corn. They make their paths up and down the rows with a dump cart by their side. These carts are there to receive the corn directly from the pickers as they move along the rows. Once the cart is full, it will leave the picker's side and make its way to the end row to unload into one of our semis. Once this trailer is filled, it will make its way back to our facility where it will offload the corn into our green sort. And this is where our corn ends its time with the field. From here, our corn will go through an intense multi-level process that will take it from a husk-covered ear of corn to being a unit of fully optimized potential. And there it is, the reason we focus on the term optimal. We've taken the time, energy, and resources necessary to bring these seeds to their highest possible potential. But here's where we overlap ourselves a little bit. The year's not over and it's time to think of a new crop. So, as we bring in our yield from one year, we look to the potential for another. Field closing. To finish out the year in the field, we must do the work to properly dress the field for winter. This includes two major steps. 1. Pellet fertilizer application, and 2. Tillage. The former has a few different components, so let's begin there. Once our crop and equipment are well departed from the field, we begin an application of fertilizer. Now, these fertilizers are comprised of 3 predominant elements: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, all of which are in pellet form. Being in pellet form allows the nutrients to be released far more slowly over the course of the winter. Now, we have brought to light the benefits of adding nitrogen to our fields. Nitrogen enables the corn to capture the energy from sunlight for its process of photosynthesis, a process which drives plant growth. So now, while nitrogen promotes the production of nutrients through photosynthesis, potassium promotes the flow of those nutrients throughout the corn plant. This helps increase our corn's resistance to diseases, makes our corn more resilient to cold weather, and it promotes a healthy growth for our corn's root system. So, potassium helps to improve our corn plant's overall quality of formation. Finally, we have phosphorus. This element is key in a lot of ways. Most importantly, it allows us to tap into the full genetic potential of our corn plants. It is a main component in ATP, which is a compound that promotes the use and conservation of energy inside of our corn's very cells. This also makes it important in cell division and the development of new tissue, as well as being essential for photosynthesis. Phosphorus is a vital compound of DNA, thus making it all the more important to add to our fields. So, as we apply fertilizer to our fields, we also add another component: cover crops. This simply refers to any crop we plant to enrich our soil between production cycles. In our case, we also utilize cover crops as a way to prevent erosion from our fields. This is a serious issue with both environmental and economical impacts. Erosion can drastically change the ecosystem that is present in and around our fields. Plus, our soil is far too rich in nutrients for us to allow it to wash away during the winter. So we have strong-rooted crops that we plant in the winter to help with this issue. Our cover crops are comprised of spring oats, nitro radish, Florida broadleaf mustard, and safflower. and we spread all these together with our fertilizer. Now, with fertilizer applied and cover crop seeds spread, it's time for the final pass of the year, tillage. This refers to a similar process to one of our very first passes of the season, cultivation. However, where cultivation was performed with large sharp hooks and rolling baskets, tillage is done with a road plow style blades. This method and equipment allows us to tear into our soil in a very productive two-folded way. Firstly, these plows can cut very deep into our soil. This allows us to reach beyond the highly trafficked top layer and cut well below the roots of the remaining corn stumps. The second benefit of this style is the folding nature of how the plow heads lay the cut earth. The sweeping wave shape of the blade forces the soil to turn over on itself. This buries our fertilizer pellets and our cover crop seeds so that they may do all their work over the course of the winter and provide us with a strong, fertile canvas to begin with next year. And that's it. The final phase of our production to properly perform the 14 precise practices to prepare, plant, protect, pollinate, procure, and process plants for the prosperity of the populace of the planet for your pontification and amusement. We've seen how every step can bring our soil, our seeds, and our team to their full potential. We have utilized our time, our energy, and our resources to bring to fruition the best seeds in the world. We have perfectly optimized the path of precision.